All right, so I often get asked, how does private equity work? Today, we're going to talk about private equity and how it works. And specifically, I'm going to talk about the 5 different ways that private equity investors make money on deals. Now, when I'm talking about private equity here, I'm not referring to all private equity. I'm not referring to venture capital or hedge funds or real estate or any of those other areas. I'm specifically talking about leveraged buyouts. And that's what we're going to dive into today. So in private equity, there are 5 major ways that private equity investors will make money on a deal. The first one is leverage, top line growth, improving bottom line performance, multiples expansion, and then through additional fees that they charge. So let's dive into the first one, which is leverage. Now, this is the big way in which private equity investors make money. So let's talk about our typical deal in private equity. Let's say that our fund is targeting a company that's generating $20 million in cash every year. And we'll assume that it's a pretty stable business. Maybe, it's a company that sells plumbing equipment, right? Markets kind of grow and shrink, but generally it's pretty flat. It's not growing a ton, it's not shrinking, right? People are always going to need plumbing supplies. So this business is generating $20 million in cash. Now, your typical private equity firm is going to target this company because it's generating this cash because it allows them to use leverage. Now, leverage just is debt. It's just a kind of a fancy word for debt. Let's say our typical private equity firm is able to borrow 5 times the cash flow of the business, 5 turns on debt. Now, this would be a little bit low relative to current markets. But in other markets, it's a little bit high, so it kind of fluctuates up and down. But just for the sake of this video, let's say they're able to get 5 times the cash flow of the business in debt. That means they're able to borrow $100 million. Okay. Let's say that when they go and meet with the person selling the business to them, that person wants about $200 million. So they run through the numbers and they're like, yeah, we can offer $200 million. So here's our company. And we're going to start them out right here. And where this axis is going to be the value of the business. And this axis is going to be time. At the time of acquisition, the private equity investor is going to be investing $100 million of equity for half the business. And then they're going to borrow another $100 million in debt for the other half of the business. Okay. Now, if all the private equity investor does is use the $20 million every year to pay off the debt, the business doesn't grow or any of those kinds of things, right? I bought this thing for $200 million. Every year, I'm going to pay off $20 million of that debt. This means that if I don't do anything but use that $20 million every year to pay off the debt, that at the end of 5 years, I will own 100% of this business. And then I could go sell it to another private equity firm for $200 million, right? Same purchase price that I bought it for. And I would get $200 million. So I put in $100 million, I sold it for $200 million, I doubled my money in 5 years. Okay, so that's pretty good, right? That's how leverage works. And you could see how if I borrowed more debt and I put in less equity, or that I could make more money, right? So maybe I put in 1/3 of the equity and I borrowed 2/3. Over that time period, I could make even more, maybe like 3 times my investment, all by doing absolutely nothing to the business, right? The business just keeps cranking along, paying off its debts, doesn't grow, doesn't improve, any of those things. So that's number one, how private equity investors make money. It's this financial engineering aspect of it. The next piece, though, is, but the thing is, really good private equity investors don't make money just on leverage alone. They find other ways to generate additional cash flow. So the first one is top line growth. So let's assume that the business is generating that $20 million per year. And that $20 million of cash is simply a percentage of revenue. Maybe it's, 10% of revenue. So what can we do? Well, if we get into the business and we find additional markets that they could go into, for example, then you could grow the top line revenue, and then that in turn would hopefully bring up your profits. So let's say I take this business, I don't even have to grow it a lot. I just grow it by I don't know, let's say 10% a year. Well, at 10% a year, just in that first year, right, this business is going to generate an additional $2 million of cash flow from a 10% increase. That $2 million, if I drag that out over 10 years, let's say I just have a one-time 10% increase. Well, that's an additional, that 10% increase is going to result in an additional $2 million of cash flow, which over a 5-year time period, that's an additional $10 million that I'm using to pay down the debt, which will allow me to pay it back a whole half year earlier, right? If I can generate 10% growth every year, right, then that could generate in excess of $2 million every year. So 2 million and then 4 million and then 6, right? And it could compound and it could shrink the amount of time it takes from 5 years to maybe 3 years, right? And that's just with minor revenue improvement. Now, the other way that you can make additional money is, let's say we keep revenue the same, but we identify some new ways for the company to save more money. So let's say our business today is making pipes and other plumbing equipment here in the US, but we know that if we move them overseas to China, that we can reduce our costs by, I don't know, like 20%, 30%, something like that. Well, if I can increase my profit margins by 20%, that represents $4 million every year of additional income. And over 5 years, that's going to be $20 million. That's like a whole year. That shaves off like a whole year of the investment. It shortens up the amount of time it takes for me to pay off all the debt and then sell the business. And like they say in business, time is money. Now, another big way in which private equity investors will increase the value of their investment is through multiples expansion. Now, we said earlier that our company is generating $20 million in cash. We paid $10 million for the business. That means we paid 10 times EBITDA or free cash flows for this company, right? What if I could figure out a way to increase that to, I don't know, 12x? Now, there could be a bunch of different things that could do that. It could be that overall the market is growing and there's more money flowing into private equity, and so people are paying more for deals. In that case, right, like I might get paid more for my business. 2001 was a great example of this. There was tons of money in the system, and private equity investors, like most investors, were paying very high valuations on investments. So it was a great time to be selling. Now, there could be other things. So for example, maybe you improve the revenues or you introduce a new type of revenue. For example, subscription revenue tends to get valued much, much higher than one-time sales. And the reason for this is because subscription revenue tends to be less risky. You have better insight into what your revenues are going to be the following year. There's some lock-in, right? So let's take our plumbing company, for example. Maybe they start shifting some of their products that they offer into services that come on a recurring basis, right? Maybe they offer some consulting services that they charge an ongoing fee to their customers for, right? And that creates some really nice subscription revenue. The other thing is, if you have a company that was just flat, not growing at all, and you get it growing all of a sudden, right? Now it's growing 10%, 20% year over year. That business in of itself is going to be worth more because investors are going to say, hey, you know, the future value of this thing, if it keeps growing, is going to be bigger, and I'm going to be willing to pay more. The other thing is, if you improve the margin profile of the business, now you have a business that's generating higher margins, and that might also be worth more to investors just on a pure multiple basis. So there's a lot of ways to do that. It's called multiple expansion, and it's a real key part of the private equity tool bag. Now, the last one is fees. So oftentimes, private equity investors will charge fees to their portfolio companies for services rendered. So for those same services that they're going in and helping the company improve margins, improve revenue, you know, get the company growing, hiring more people, taking board seats, all of those different things. Lots of private equity firms will charge pretty hefty fees for those services. And those fees end up going into the bottom line of a private equity fund. So those are all the different ways in which private equity funds make money on their deals. If this was helpful, check out some of my other videos, like what it's like working in private equity. Thanks.